Good afternoon. I heard an echo. Good afternoon. We are so happy that you decided to be with us this afternoon. I'm Stan Watson with Hill Collaborative. We are happy that you showed up today. We thank you for joining us today, and we also want to thank our online viewers from the church and also from Facebook Live and from our Hill Collaborative family. We're here today to present to our community and to our Facebook and to our online listeners and viewers today a forum on protecting health equity and kidney care. And we're so happy to be partnership with Ardelyx, and we thank them for coming. We thank for all that you've done in the past and our continued relationship with you guys. We want to make sure that this information gets out to our community because it's very, very important. What we're here for today is not only to present the information to you, but also to talk to you about this new HR resolution that we have in Congress that was placed before us by a gentleman that Howard and I served with in the General Assembly. And that piece of legislation talks about making sure that we can get CMS and others to pay for a particular drug that I think our next speaker is going to talk about, that it came from Ardelyx, that helps us with phosphorus in our bodies, especially for those that are suffering from dialysis or on dialysis. And I think that those are the kind of things that we want to make sure that we get out to the community. It's going to be our mission and our goal to work with Mr. Buddy Carter and Mr. Williams, as well as our legislature in the state of Georgia, to get this particular piece of legislation passed. One of the things that Howard and I talk about all the time is advocacy in our community. Community can push these advocates to do what they need to do in the general legislatures around the country. But one of the problems that we have sometimes is our communities don't have the information they need to make intelligent decisions to help our legislators pass legislation or to make sure that those things are taken care of. So we're trying to educate our community to make sure that our community understands how important it is to know who your legislators are, your House of Representatives as well as your senators, to make these things come to fruition. It's a great thing when we push this information out, because then we have our network of advocacy that starts in our community, that goes to our payers and also to our physicians, to make sure that these things can be taken care of and we can have a quality of life that's important for us here in America. So with that, I'm going to bring up Ms. Sibley, Ms. Tanya Sibley, who's a family nurse practitioner. She's also a member of our church here at Pilgrim Rest, over the medical advocacy ministry here, to bring us greetings and also to do our prayer, to encourage us as we participate this morning and this afternoon to bring this information to our community, and we'll be right back. Would you give her a hand as she comes this morning?
Good afternoon, everyone. We just want to welcome you here to Pilgrim Rest Baptist Church. We are delighted to host this very important and necessary event to the community. And so we want to thank our partner, First Institution Baptist Church, our sister church down the street, for partnering with us. We also want to thank Ardelyx Pharmaceuticals for all that you do, and Hill Collaborative for being so persistent to get this on the way, because it was not easy. So I just want to welcome you, and please come back and see us. And not just for this event, but we look forward to having more events that we can get to the community and help them, because this is important and necessary work. And thank you for doing the work. If you'll bow your head for a word of prayer with us. Father God, we just want to thank you. We want to give you honor and glory, because it all belongs to you. We need you in everything that we do. We ask that you would bless each individual here, each individual with what they need, God, because you are the source. We're only the resource. And God, we ask that you would make a way out of no way. God, get this information to who it needs to get to. God, we know that social media is the platform. So God, thank you for allowing this to be streamed, God. And so that is needed. God, we perish for lack of knowledge, and thank you for the wisdom of those that will be speaking for us today. We thank you, we praise you, and we glorify you. In Jesus' name, amen. welcome.
All right, as they say at the church, I'm sure that you feel better now that we've had our invocation. We'll have now welcome remarks from two persons. I'm going to bring them up together. Howard Mosley, who's our corporate treasurer for Hill Collaborative, with us this morning, and also Ken Sprague, who's director of government affairs for our delegates. Would both of you gentlemen come at the same time? Give them a hand as they come this morning for our online viewers.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Ken Sprague. I work for Ardelyx. So we're obviously one of the sponsors here today. We're really happy to be able to work with the Hill Collaborative and Pilgrim Rest Baptist Church on this. So Ardelyx is growing, a small but growing biopharmaceutical company that's based in Massachusetts. Our company was founded on the mission to discover, develop, and deliver innovative medicines to patients that have chronic diseases categorized by a significant unmet medical need. For the last 13 years, we've studied a treatment for a comorbidity of kidney failure, specifically for patients that are on dialysis that suffer from hyperphosphatemia. The condition's marked by the individual having high phosphorus levels in their body. And frankly, I'm going to let Dr. Williams come up here in a second and speak more to it because she can do it much better justice. But we were thrilled in 2023 to actually receive FDA approval for our drug. Really was a big step forward for this disease state. I think one that has unfortunately not seen a lot of innovation in the last several decades. That being said, we're extremely concerned. And so we heard a few remarks a moment ago about some legislation that we're advocating on behalf of with the community. CMS and Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, in their wisdom, has promulgated some policy that is particularly problematic from an access perspective. This is something that Congress has acted on 3 times to prevent, and specifically this policy would be moving this class of drugs, phosphate-lowering treatments, from Medicare Part D, as in dog, to Medicare Part B in a bundled payment system. We unfortunately know that if that is to happen, access to those drugs would be dramatically restricted, not just ours either. So we're working very hard to prevent that. We're lucky and fortunate to have a lot of really good champions in Congress that are supporting this issue and supporting our legislation. We have a bill both in the House and the Senate, and I think I'll say we're cautiously optimistic that we can actually see some action yet this year. So we're very thrilled about that. We're thrilled to be here today and talk to all of you about it. Again, thank you to Pilgrim Rest Baptist Church, to Elder Yarbrough, to all of you. We wouldn't be here without you. This is such an important issue, and it really is driven by patients in the community. So thank you very much.
Again, good morning. Good morning. It's indeed my pleasure to be here. My name is Howard Mosby. Again, I am the corporate treasurer for Hill. I just want to say, first of all, thank you, Ardelyx, for making this possible and being the great partner that you are. So I want to thank Pilgrim for allowing us coming to your house. I know it was said earlier that how much that we put in to try to get this event to happen this year. It was important for us to ensure that Arizona actually had an opportunity to hear about what this particular piece of legislation is about. But more importantly than that, it really is about the fact that kidney disease really doesn't care about what your political affiliation is. Kidney disease doesn't care about whether or not you go vote or not. But all of those things actually have some kind of effect in how we are delivered health care. And when you start thinking about health equity from across the multiple stages of what health equity covers, for some reason, when it comes down to policy discussions, we tend to kind of shy away from that, but we shouldn't. I think that the church is probably the most appropriate place for us to be having these conversations, number one. Stan and I were talking earlier about the fact that outside of the pastor's sermon back in the day, announcements were the number one thing that people came to church to hear about what was happening in the community. And we want to make sure that this congregation, this city, hears about how devastating this disease is and how any prevention of access to care can be detrimental to communities. And kidney disease is running rampant in our community, and we really need to look holistically at it. And so we're going to do a broad conversation here around kidney disease, kidney health, and then you're going to hear specifics around this particular issue that actually could really negatively affect those that are receiving care around kidney health and the dialysis. Dialysis is, I don't know if any of you know people on dialysis, but it is not probably something that you would want to see, and the things that people go through in this process, you're going to hear about, and that we don't need to prevent them or provide barriers for individuals to continue to get that care and make sure that they have the highest quality of life they can be. So we're here to be a part of the community. Ardelyx, I don't know how many of y'all can say that you brought in a multinational global company, if you will, to your front doorstep to say we want to actually tell you about something. We're here to give, not here to take. So we're proud to be here to do this today, and I am just excited about the work that's getting ready to happen. Y'all are going to hear a treat from Dr. Williams. I'm just telling you, every time I hear this presentation, it sends chills down my back. And so I just want you to know that this is probably one of the most dynamic speakers that I've had an opportunity to be a part of and to listen to and call my friend. She's just awesome. And so with that, Mr. Watson, I will get out of the way and let's let this program rock and roll.
Thank you.
All right, let's give them a hand. Thank you so very much. You're trying to steal all my thunder. I'm supposed to do the introduction, but that's okay. We're going to make it work. And for our online viewers, you're in for a treat as well. Thank you, Howard. Thank you, Ken, for bringing greetings for us. And with our Elder Richard Yarborough is not here, but thank you, Tanya, for bringing the invocation for us as well. Well, we're in for a treat. Ms. Laura Williams is the Chief Medical Officer for Ardelyx. She has been the Chief Medical Officer at Ardelyx since 2021, having joined the company in November 2020 as the Senior Vice President of Global Therapeutic Strategies and Patient Advocacy. She's a leader in the life sciences sector with extensive experience in pharmaceutical drug development, healthcare policy, patient advocacy, and portfolio strategy. As an accomplished and results-oriented physician scientist and board member, Ms. Laura is dedicated to discovering, developing, and commercializing innovative therapies that address unmet medical needs with over 25 years of experience in the pharmaceutical industry. So we're in for a treat. I think that she has done a wonderful job, and we are trying to assist her in showing our community what we're trying to get done in our mission, and that is to make sure that you understand what we're trying to do with this new drug, a drug that we found out that the clinical trial included over 1,200 patients in 3 phases, been approved by FDA, and we're trying to get it to get paid in our formularies and also through our reimbursement, because it's important for us to do that. So with that, would you please give a warm welcome for Ms. Laura Williams, the Chief Medical Officer for Ardelyx, as she comes this morning. I'm gonna put you over here. You want me to get you a chair? You want a chair to?
Thank you. Thank you so very much for that kind introduction. Let me just get myself settled here. I had knee surgery not long ago, and so that's part of the difficulty with mobility. But it's all going good. Anyway, I want to start, first of all, by saying thank you for the opportunity to have us here today and talk to you a little bit about not only kidney disease, but talk a little bit about the social determinants of health, things that actually interfere with equitable outcomes in health. And, you know, I'll get into it a little bit more during the slides, but it's a very important topic. So I'm Laura Williams. I'm the Chief Medical Officer at Ardelyx, as you heard. And, you know, I am a child of the South, and my adopted dad was a Southern Baptist minister, so every time I come to the church, I'm reminded of Psalms 122. I was glad when they said unto me, let us go into the house of the Lord. So it's always good to go back to your roots. But I think this is particularly important just because, again, it's a message that I think resonates for all patients, but particularly for patients who have kidney failure and on maintenance dialysis. So if we could load the slides, and I don't have something to progress it. So if you go to the next slide, what I really want to talk to you about is one of the policy issues that relate. So we talk about social determinants of health all the time: where you live, where you work, how much money you make, all of those sorts of things. Those are things that obviously have a direct impact, if you will, on health outcomes, right? I mean, I know even in Massachusetts, you can go from Cambridge, one relatively well-developed neighborhood, just a few miles, maybe 10, 15 miles, to Roxbury, and your mortality rate changes, not for the good, just based on where you live. And that's Massachusetts, where we have some of the best hospitals in the world. So these social determinants of health are really important. And I think one of the ones that we often don't talk about enough is really how policy can actually impact those determinants of health. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. So if we advance the slides, you can see under community and social context, I've added policy and law. And when you look at those, the graph on the right, you can really see policy and law as being part of this whole construct that we know of in terms of social determinants of health. If we move to the next slide, let's talk a little bit of background in terms of chronic kidney disease, because I think this is really important. Obviously, it's a big problem in the U.S. 37 million people in the U.S. have chronic kidney disease. And despite its high prevalence, nearly 90% of folks don't know that they actually are impacted or that they have the disease. That's huge. Just pause for a minute. 37 million people have this, and yet 90% of folks, up to 90% of folks, don't know that they actually have the disease. This is why we call some of these diseases silent killers, right? They don't come with a lot of symptoms, and so if you have problems in terms of access to care, don't get regular checkups, regular labs, there's really no way of knowing. So that's problematic in and of itself. Then when you start to think about the causes, right? Diabetes and hypertension are the number 1 and 2 reasons why people have chronic kidney disease. There's certainly other reasons, particularly in African Americans. There's a genetic predisposition, AMKD, or it's a gene called ApoL1, and we call it ApoL1 mediated kidney disease. That's a small percentage of patients, but yet it's a very high percentage of patients who happen to be of African American descent. So that can be problematic. And then there are some, I guess, unusual causes of chronic kidney disease. And the one that I think is most relevant, that I like to bring to people's attention, affects laborers. People who are out there working in the hot sun for long periods of time over long durations. So construction workers, road workers, plantations, farmers, all of those sorts of things. That's a problem. I mean, the repeated exposure to high temperatures causes dehydration. Repetitive dehydration leads to kidney failure, kidney disease. And so these are usually younger, healthy people who don't actually have diabetes or hypertension, but this is actually as a result of their work. And so when we start talking about chronic kidney disease and all of the causes, it's variable. I mean, certainly, again, diabetes, hypertension, number 1 and 2, and again, those are diseases that often go unnoticed because they don't necessarily have a lot of symptoms. And I think there was another event that was held here earlier that really was focusing on diabetes, which is apropos because, again, that's the #1 cause of chronic kidney disease and part of what we're talking about today. And so now when you start to talk about chronic kidney disease, 37 million people, about 800,000 of them progress to kidney failure. And when you get to that point, there's really only two modes of therapy, right? One is maintenance dialysis, and the other one is transplants, right? And so when you think about sort of the breakdown, about 2/3 of patients with kidney failure actually end up on maintenance dialysis, and another third, because there's obviously a lack of organs, end up with transplants. So transplants, when you look at mortality, actually have a better long-term survival. Yet, because of because of a lot of issues, not the least of which is that there's just not enough organs to transplant. That is the lesser of the two therapies. And so I think one of the other pieces to understand is, so for those dialysis patients, where are they taken care of? It's dialysis organizations, and we'll talk a lot more about this because this is part of the policy piece that I think is really, really important. It's also important to note the health inequities that we see in this space, and I think COVID brought to light a lot of that, right? But when you look at kidney failure, blacks and non-white Hispanics are nearly, they're certainly disproportionately affected, with blacks having a 4-fold higher rate of kidney failure than whites, and Hispanics having a 2.5-fold higher rate. And despite those discrepancies, those two demographics are less likely to get transplants. And you can see some of the numbers that are listed there. So if we move to sort of part of the issue, Medicare and ESRD. So since 1972, the government has said we're going to take care of patients who are on maintenance dialysis, who have kidney failure. We're going to take care of those costs. And up until 2011, the way they did it is that they basically paid dialysis organizations a fee for service. So whatever it costs for that patient to sit in that dialysis chair, they paid that cost. You bill the dialysis organization, the government pays it. And what does that payment usually entail? It entails the dialysis itself. It entails labs that might need to be done while you're sitting in the dialysis chair, the people who are taking care of you while you're in the dialysis chair, and medications that are usually given during dialysis. So that's usually what it goes into that payment. But the payment started to get kind of out of hand, right? And so in 2011, the government said, we're going to change this fee for service, and we're going to now make this a bundle payment. So one fixed payment. And you, dialysis organization, need to figure out your budget to make sure that you can do all the things that you were normally doing, but with this fixed payment. And so let's just say that fixed payment is about $250 a month. So that includes all the things that I noted. So you can imagine as new drugs come out, that fixed payment no longer is able to take care of the cost, not just of the new drugs, but the rising cost of healthcare in and of itself. And so it's an antiquated system that we don't have anywhere else but for patients who have kidney failure. And that's a problem, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more. This is just another slide talking about the non-traditional origin. So these are the laborers who are out there in the sun. I won't go through that in a lot of detail, but on the next slide, the New York Times, not New York Times, but Time magazine actually had a nice label looking at chronic kidney disease being poised as becoming the black lung of climate change. In other words, again, this is another cause of kidney disease, being exposed to high heat and high temperatures for long periods of time. Next slide, please. So let's just get down to the issue. One of the big things, so we've talked about, these social determinants of health. We're going to get to the policy that is at hand. Giving you a little bit of background about chronic kidney disease, I think it's important to note that there are a number of complications that patients who have kidney failure face, right? A number of complications, because when the kidney shut down, there are a lot of things that the kidney usually does that it can no longer do. So you can think of those things. Anemia is one of those things, because the kidney produces a hormone that tells the bone marrow to make red blood cells so that you don't get anemic. So if the kidneys are not working, you don't build that hormone. The other thing, amongst other things, are things that control our bone and mineral metabolism. So things like calcium, things like phosphorus, things like a hormone called PTH, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. The bottom line, though, among all of the things in terms of laboratory complications that our patients who are on maintenance dialysis face, hyperphosphatemia, an increase in the serum phosphorus, is the most deadly. It carries the highest mortality rate. And you can see here, it's like a 6-fold higher rate than secondary hyperparathyroidism, which is another big name for a bone mineral disease that a lot of patients with dialysis get as a result of their kidneys failing. And so this is a particular problem, and it's a very big problem in terms of trying to manage it. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail going forward. But I show this slide just to highlight, again, the complications that patients have, and the hyperphosphatemia being one of the most important ones. And why is that important? Again, the kidney does a whole lot of things. It gets rid of the waste that is in our bodies, but it also takes care of phosphorus. So phosphorus is something that is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It's in all the foods we eat, right? And it's really high in processed foods. And so in a normal kidney, it excretes that phosphorus out of the body through the urine. So when the kidneys fail, that doesn't happen. The phosphorus builds up, and again, it carries the highest mortality among patients with kidney failure. And why is that? It's because that phosphorus binds to calcium, and that calcium and phosphorus together deposit in the blood vessels in our bodies, and that increases our mortality from cardiovascular death, heart attacks, strokes, all of those things. And so it's a major complication, and it's a silent one that we don't talk about a lot. But we're going to talk about how that is going to potentially be impacted by policies that CMS is wanting to implement. So next slide. And this is just another slide depicting the issue with serum phosphorus. And if you look at the bar in the middle that's sort of bluish orange, that's around the normal range, right? Every 1 milligram increment above that normal range carries an increased risk in mortality. So it's a big deal to try to make sure that these patients have good phosphorus control, that they're in the normal range, because when that's not the case, we're increasing their risk of morbidity and mortality. Next slide, please. And this is just a depiction of those calcium phosphorus deposits that line up in the blood vessels in the body. And so the one on the left is in the abdominal aorta. So it's aorta, biggest blood vessel in the body. And you're not supposed to be able to see the outer limits of a blood vessel. The only reason you can see that is because it's calcium and phosphorus deposits. And you can see where the arrows are pointing that that's what that is. The one in the middle is blood vessels surrounding the heart. So this is a patient who, again, is on dialysis, only 42 years old, but has multiple calcification in the heart, in the blood vessels that surround the heart. And then the last one is of a 65-year-old patient, again on dialysis, who has a lot of those calcium deposits in the blood vessels behind the knee. And so it's just a nice depiction, if you will, of what is really happening. We talk about this sort of in a foreign way, but it's a real issue, and that is why it is, I think the policies around treating this disease is really important. So the next slide, please. So again, and if you can advance it one more. So there are guidelines out there that tell us as physicians how we need to manage phosphorus. And the bottom line, what this says is we need to try to get your phosphorus to normal levels by whatever means necessary. And what are those means? I think the next slide sort of goes through that. There are two, and you can advance it as well. There are two sort of non-pharmaceutical, one more time, please. Go back. So there are two non-pharmaceutical or non-pharmacological, non-medication ways that you can treat hyperphosphatemia. One is diet, right? You could say, gosh, your kidneys don't work as well, so you shouldn't eat as much phosphorus. That's great, you know, if you're able to do that. Again, phosphorus is everywhere. And a lot of our patients live in food deserts, if not food swamps, where they're actually getting their food from the dollar store. They don't have a Whole Foods or a whole paycheck, as I like to say. So it's easy to say, wow, just watch what you eat. We should always do that. We should always talk about diet. We should always talk about exercise. But it's not always practical. And even with diet and exercise, often these patients are not able to be controlled just with diet alone. The other thing that helps is dialysis itself. Dialysis will remove, some of that excess phosphorus. But we are already asking patients to come to an in-center dialysis clinic 3 times a week, 3 to 4 hours at a time. To ask to do that even more is not only impractical for the patient, it's impractical for the dialysis centers that are actually providing this service. It logistically would be a nightmare to try to do that any more frequently. And so if you go to the next slide, the only other way to do this is with medications. And so we call these medications phosphate-lowering therapies. And the first one that I'm depicting here are phosphate binders. And just like the name implies, these are medications that you take with food, and they bind the phosphorus that's in the food. So they have to be taken by mouth because that's where the food goes, right? And so that phosphorus tablet, and they're big tablets, they bind the food. You take them 3 times a day. Most patients take 3 pills 3 times a day, and that's not including all the other medications that they have to take. And so the median dose or number of phosphate binders that a patient takes a day is about 9. So again, that's not including the medicines that they take for their hypertension or their diabetes or their heart failure or their other comorbidities. But again, these medications, if you go to the next slide, these were the only things that we were offering patients for a long, long time. So 50 years, 5 decades, it's only been that one class of therapy, phosphate binders. Imagine if that was the only progress we had made in cancer over 50 years. Imagine that, right? But that's what we had. So if you go to the next slide, the newer phosphate-lowering therapy, instead of a binder, it's a phosphate blocker or a phosphate absorption inhibitor. And it actually works through the main pathway that phosphorus gets into our bloodstream. It blocks phosphorus from being absorbed through our cells, so it doesn't leave the gut and go to the bloodstream. So it's a blocker instead of a binder. And this is a drug that I'm excited about because it's a drug that we worked on for a very long time because there was no innovation in this space. And I have a slide at the end to talk about the issues with innovation in this space. And one of the things that policy does is it actually stifles innovation in this space. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. But this drug is called Xphozah. And if you go to the next slide, unlike binders, it's 2 tablets. So one with each of your 2 largest meals. So 2 tablets a day as opposed to 9 a day. We think this is innovation, not only because it's a new mechanism of action, but when we actually studied this drug in our clinical trials, patients said this was much more efficient. It helped their quality of life. It decreased their pill burden, and they felt better all in all about their phosphate management. And so I think the other thing that I was very excited about is that, one of the things that happens is innovation in all of these spaces is great, right? But if you're not including the people who actually have the disease in your clinical trials, that's problematic. So in our clinical trials with this drug, we have 45% representation of African Americans and 28% representation of Hispanics. We think that's important, and we think it's a win-win, because now, at the end of these trials, you have data that shows that this drug works across all populations, right? And so that was important for us. Next slide, please. This is a really long slide, and I'll just tell you the key points, right? Again, it's talking about some of the things that I said already. Medicare pays for this, these payments for dialysis patients since 1972. And they shifted in 2011 from a fee-for-service to a bundle payment system. We call it the ESRD prospective payment system. It's a whole mouthful, just say bundle, right? It's a fixed payment. But in 2017, they said, well, we're gonna change this a little bit more. They have been trying to put drugs that can only be taken by mouth. We call them oral-only drugs. They've been trying to put those into the bundle, into that fixed payment system since 2011. But the government has acted 3 times in the past to say that shouldn't happen. And that's one of the policy issues that we will get to. But as they were preparing to do this for the first time in terms of, it wasn't an oral only, but the first time that they wanted to, sort of tweak this was in 2017, and is with a class of drugs called calcimimetics. So what does that mean? These drugs act like calcium would act in your body. And they're used to treat another complication that dialysis patients get, that secondary hyperparathyroidism word, which is basically a nice, long, fancy name for a bone and mineral metabolism issue, basically, that happens when your kidneys fail. And so in 2017, what they said is, with this new class of drugs, we're going to try this experiment, right? We're going to put them into a bundle system. And there were 2 drugs that fit into this class. One was an oral drug that was approved in 2004, and then the other one was an IV injection drug that was approved in 2017. And so they set up this system called the TDAPA system, which is a period of testing to see how well that drug or those drugs would be utilized before they put them into that bundle system, right? And the way they do that is interesting, or the way they did it before was interesting, because there was a little bit of a financial incentive to use these drugs during that experiment period, that TDAPA period. And the reason they wanted to do that is because they was going to use that data during that period to say, how much more should we increase that bundle payment? So if it was $250, I'm going to take this data, right, that I get in this experimental period, and depending on how much utilization happens, I'm going to use that data to determine how much I increase that fixed payment. And let's say it was $250, and let's say they did this experiment, and what they saw based on the utilization is that we're going to increase that to $260 from $250. Well, this drug just got approved in 2017, and $10 is not going to pay for that drug. So exactly what you would expect happened, because there was a financial incentive. People used the newer drug during that trial period. But then when the financial incentive was taken away, and they were ready to implement the bundle system, then the utilization of the newer, more effective drug went away. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. But that's what all of this says. And there are other examples. So this was their light, bright star of a great example of why the bundle system worked. Because they said it was going to increase utilization, it was going to help all patients, but particularly black patients, and that they were going to monitor the situation to make sure that there were no untoward effects of putting these drugs in the bundle. So let's just see what happened. So let's go to the next slide. That's just the background that I've already shared with you. So next slide, please. Next slide, please. And here's what happened. So actually, go back one slide. So let's just look at the 3 points under the bottom. So in June of this year, CMS said, we're going to put, we like what we did with this class of drug called calcimimetics. It was a great thing. And so because of that, we're going to now put these phosphate-lowering therapies into the bundle, right? And we're going to do that starting January 1st, 2025. And the reason we're going to do that is what's on the bottom of the slide. Those numbers 1, 2, and 3. First, they said, look, when we did this for calcimimetics in 2018, it was excellent. There was a significant increase in utilization. And then they said, you know, it helped blacks quite a bit. The utilization, you know, helped with cost. It was more efficient. It was just great, right? And then number 3, they said is, gosh, you know, we're going to monitor it. We've been monitoring it, and we haven't seen anything bad. Well, let's just look at the data and see if any of those 3 points are true. Let's go through it. Next slide. Well, it turns out the first point is, gosh, we're going to increase utilization. Well, let's look at it. So that trial period, that TDAPA period, was 2018 to 2021, right? But everything on the left of that slide was before they put these drugs, the calcimimetics, into the bundle. And what you can see is that there's a steady increase. If you look at 2011 to 2017, the percentage of people who are using calcimimetics goes from 22.8% all the way up to 30.1%. So independent of this, of putting these drugs into the bundle, we see an increase in utilization. All right, now let's go to that 3-year period where they're trying this trial to see if you get increased utilization. Well, you do. But where is that increased utilization happening? It's happening in the yellow bars. The yellow bars represent the newer, more effective drug. The blue bars represent the older, less effective drug, okay? And what you see in that 3-year period that's shaded in the light blue in the middle, what you see is that the older drugs usage goes down, right? Because you started at 30.6 in the first year, you can see it goes down to 24.3, then 22.7. And then the newer drug, right, its utilization goes up. So utilization did increase, but it increased because there was an incentive to use the newer, more effective drug. And people stopped using the older drug. And that was a good thing. If the newer drug is more effective, if it's going to control this condition better, use it. But then toward the end of that period, when they take away the financial incentive, look at the utilization of the newer drug. It drops back down. It's a bell-shaped curve. If you just look at the gold bars, right? It starts low at 2.9%, and by the time it's done, it's 3%. It's at the same place. We didn't increase utilization. The utilization was driven by the use of the newer, more effective drug, and that was driven because there was a financial incentive to do so. So the second point that they made is that, okay, this is great. Utilization went up, and it really was great for blacks. So this next slide is the same data, but it's showing you, if we go to the next slide, there we go, same data. So on the left is utilization in blacks of these drugs, and on the right is utilization in whites. The fact of the matter is, just focus on the part of the slide that has the red, because now the newer drug is depicted in red, okay? And you can see that the utilization is the same in terms of the ratio before the bundle or after the bundle. In other words, 1.6 to 1.7 ratio in terms of blacks to whites using these drugs was there even before they put them in the bundle. And why is there more utilization in blacks than whites? It's because there's more disease in blacks than whites and a greater severity of disease. So you didn't change the ratio. Blacks didn't start using this drug more. Even during that experiment period, the increase that you see in blacks, you see that same increase in white, and the actual ratio is the same, 1.6 to 1.7. So to say that not only did we increase utilization, it was really great in blacks is, again, not true. Based on data. And this is data that this is their data. This is data from the U.S. Renal Data Service, the largest database for dialysis patients that exist. Next slide, please. And then finally, there's a new study that just came out maybe a month ago that, again, they said we increase utilization, definitely better in blacks, and we monitored things, and things are just peachy. They're fine, right? Well, this study begs to differ, right? This is a study, again, it's a prospective study that was just published this year in a peer-reviewed journal looking at 713 patients on maintenance dialysis. And basically what they did is they looked at the period 6 months before people, while they were on this newer drug, they looked at what happened 6 months before that drug was discontinued to what happened 6 months after the drug was continued, right? So what they were looking at is, again, this drug lowers a hormone called PTH. And so one of the main things they looked at is, what were their PTH values before they stopped the drug? And then what happened after they stopped the drug? Because remember, I've just shown you that toward the end, when there was no incentive, they stopped using the more effective drug. It was discontinued. So this study looked at what was the effect of discontinuing that newer drug. And what you see, I think most importantly, first and foremost, you saw 58% of people, or a 58% decreased utilization. Okay, that happened in that 6-month period. So they stopped the new drug, and then 73% of those patients were switched to the older, less effective drug. And then you say, well, then what happened? On the far right, you can see what happened. First and foremost, the PTH levels, the things that this drug is supposed to control, shot up. And so then you say, gosh, there are guidelines. What happened to guidelines? Well, in that 6-month period, overall, 15% of patients had an increased level in that PTH that was above guidelines. So they had a severe increase in their PTH level, which would eventually lead to having to have surgery, as opposed to just using the more effective drug. It was 15% of patients overall, and it was 23% in blacks. So if you go to the next slide, their own data debunks that whole theory. And skip to the final one, I'm sorry. So again, number one, if we put these calcimimetics into the bundle, and that was increased, that represented increased access to patients. Well, the data does not support that, and I've just walked you through that. Then they said, well, number two, as utilization increased, cost decreased. Well, the cost decreased after you stop paying for the more effective drug. So yeah, that would make sense. If you don't buy the drug, it doesn't cost anything. And then finally, number three, they said, again, we've been monitoring stuff and it's been okay. Well, the last slide that I showed you suggests otherwise, right? It suggests that their PTH levels are going up. And we have new data that suggests that as they discontinued the newer, more effective drug, there were more surgeries in those patients. And so this is a problem. So they're saying they have data that said if we put these drugs into the bundle, this would be great. Their data, their own data, the U.S. Renal Services data, says otherwise. And so this is concerning for us when we start now talking about phosphate-lowering therapies. And so if you go to the next slide. So the drugs that I just talked about, that was for a condition that happens in about 20 to 30% of dialysis patients. Well, guess what? Hyperphosphatemia happens in about 80% of dialysis patients. And I've already shared with you that it carries a much higher mortality risk, 6-fold higher than the PTH piece, right? And so now you want to do the same experiment with a new class of drugs and a condition that is affecting even more dialysis patients, nearly 80%, and that condition itself carries a much higher mortality rate. That's problematic. Again, you're experimenting absent data. And I would say absent data from the phosphate-lowering therapies, but you've got data now on the calcimimetics. You've got data that you've already generated. You've done this experiment before, and it's failed. And yet you want to do it again. Why? Next slide. Oh, it is this slide. So what we're saying is that including these oral-only phosphate-lowering therapies into the bundle could have detrimental effects. We think it would decrease patients' access. Instead of, having all of the tools available in your toolbox from a medication standpoint, you have a standardized protocol that says one size fits all. So you take away that individualized care that patients would otherwise get, right? I mean, I can't imagine treating diabetes that way. I can't imagine just saying you get metformin and that's it, especially when there's Jardiance and Ozempic and, Farxiga and the list goes on in terms of other drugs. I don't know of any cancer that's treated that way. When I did HIV therapy, patients still died if we just gave them AZT. It wasn't until we had a cocktail of drugs that actually made a difference. Same concept here. Again, different drugs, different mechanisms of action always have helped us get to goal. Same thing with hypertension. Who among us, and I'll speak for myself, has ever been controlled with their blood pressure just on a diuretic? I'm sorry. No. We use different modes of therapy, different mechanisms of action. Diuretics, beta blockers, calcium channel blockers, all sorts of things with the goal of getting your blood pressure under control. Same thing is true here with phosphate management, which is even more complicated because it's so much it's variable and it depends on the patient. You need that individualized care. I think the other risk here is that it takes away that shared decision making that we should expect as a patient interacts with his or her caregiver. And so that is why there's a problem. And I think if we go to the next slide, again, you've heard that Congress has acted 3 times in the past to say, no, you shouldn't put these oral-only drugs into the bundle. And unlike calcimimetics, phosphate-lowering therapies don't have an IV form. Again, they have to interact with the food that's in your gut. So they can only be given by mouth. The other piece is that because they can only be given by mouth, you can't eat during dialysis. They are not part of a dialysis service. So remember that bundle payment is supposed to pay for drugs that are needed during dialysis. These drugs are given multiple times a day with food, not during dialysis. There is no precedent to have them included in a bundle system. And so, again, Congress has acted 3 times in the past. There are 2 companion bills now that have been introduced, one from the House, one from the Senate that's got a lot of support. Bicameral, bipartisan support, support by a number of advocacy groups, not just patient advocacy groups in the kidney space, but across a number of spaces. And so if you're asking what you can do, we've got a slide that sort of addresses that as well. And this just talks about innovation. Keep going on this one. I mean, this dialysis hasn't changed a whole lot. Phones changed a whole lot in this period of time. I mean, remember those touch tone? I mean, not touch, whatever, the dial. I had one. I mean, we did. I'm sorry. Anyway, and then there's the BlackBerry, but look at how you got an iPhone. We talked about like just, therapies in this area. Our patients deserve better. Next slide, please. And this just speaks to the number of drug approvals. I love the fact that there's a booming, sort of research effort in the cancer space. I would love to see the same thing in the kidney space. But look, just go to the total line, right? When you look at number of new FDA drug approvals, 401 total, with 30% in cancer and less than 3% in kidney. That's just not right. But why is that the case? Well, if you've got antiquated systems that don't compensate folks or don't reward patient or companies for innovation, then that's what happens. Companies leave those spaces. Next slide. And these are just some sobering facts. We've talked about all of this, but I just think the ones on the right are really important. 37 million Americans with kidney disease, that's 15%. 3.5 to 4-fold higher rates in African Americans in terms of developing kidney failure. 110,000 Americans began hemodialysis every year. 360 people began dialysis treatment every 24 hours. And a typical in-center hemodialysis patient spends 12 hours a week attached to a machine. And 13 people die every day waiting for a transplant. Next slide, please. I think this is the last one. This is what you can do. Again, there's a bipartisan, bicameral bill that's there. Let your representatives know that, this is important to us. This is important, for this patient population. And it is one of those policies that could be a negative determinant of health. And so I'll stop there because I'm probably over. Yes, way over. But hopefully you understand and get the message. Thank you.
Awesome. That was a wealth of experience and a wealth of information. Hold on 1 second. I'm going to ask one question, Dr. Williams. Just one question for you. Yes, ma'am. I had to just ask one of them.
No, it's good.
For an audience. You talked about in your slide, which was a wealth of information about who can promote access to the drug, and you said that CMS is telling us and you that the price or bundling of the drug will promote access to this particular drug, the exposure that we have from Ardelyx. Why wouldn't the nephrologist and the patient promote this drug, what we're trying to do today? Why would they help us to promote this?
Yeah, I think, you can talk to most nephrologists across the country, and they agree that this is a bad policy, that we shouldn't do that. And in the example that I talked about earlier with the calcimimetics, they did exactly that. I mean, and we hear these stories every day of nephrologists asking for the more effective, more innovative drug in that space, and are just unable to get it because now it's coming through the dialysis organization because they put it in the bundle system. Whereas before, they could just write a prescription for it when it was Medicare Part D, and the patients could go and pick it up. And from an affordability standpoint, I think the onus is also on the company to make sure that patients who are uninsured or underinsured can actually access the drug. And I will say that from an Ardelyx perspective is that we have a benevolent patient assistance program so that if patients are actually written a prescription for Xphozah and they are uninsured or underinsured, that they can actually go through our patient assistance program and get the drug. And so I think that, again, if we look at the situation today, the best way that patients can have access to this drug is to keep it where it is under Medicare Part D. And the other final point is, there is a system by which the government looks at whether or not changing these policies costs money. Well, they looked at this for the phosphate lowering therapies, and it's actually budget zero. It doesn't cost the government any more money to keep the drugs where they are. So there's no real incentive. There's no scientific reason to do it, and there's no financial reason to do it.
And last question, and we'll just push for Mr. Waters in a second, but also for our part two on Saturday. How important is it for our community and advocates to help with policy? We just had an election. We don't know how public health will be implemented. We don't know how CMS is going to act, or FDA or CDC. What do you think our delegate's role will be and HIL's role will be to make sure that items like this and legislation like this gets out to our community so we can help to push the types of legislation that we need to make sure that our patients and our patient advocates have the help that they need in America?
Yeah, if we go back to that last slide, it's things like this. Is events like this, right? Where we actually talk about it. We talk about the issue, we educate on the issue, and then we let our voices be heard in terms of, what we believe. I think that is really key. And we're going to talk a lot more about that, I think, in the second part of the program on Saturday in terms of, other things that we can do. But I think, again, events like this, things that the HIL collaboration is doing, I think makes a huge difference in the community. We've done this now at churches in Atlanta, churches in Detroit, churches in Milwaukee, and now here. And I think we just, and then we use social media platforms to push that message out further.
Excellent. Let's give her another hand. Thank you so very much. Great presentation. Thank you so much. We have another presenter who's going to be with us today, Dr. Victor Waters. He's the Chief Medical Officer at Dignity Health at St. Joseph Hospital and Medical Center, as well as Dignity Health St. Joseph Westgate Medical Center here. And with over 30 years of clinical experience in emergency medicine and internal medicine, Dr. Waters is a distinguished physician. He also has approximately 20 years of experience in administrative leadership prior to his role at St. Joseph. Dr. Waters served as the Chief Medical Officer at Dignity Health at St. Bernardine's Medical Center in San Bernardino, California. And additionally, he's held positions of interim president and Chief Executive Officer at Nexus Fort Washington Medical Center, which is located outside of Washington. Would you welcome, he behind me? Mr. Waters, there he is. Okay, thank you. Give him a hand as he comes this morning. And we hope that you take the time that we need to talk to you a little bit about public health in your presentation this morning.
It's really an honor to be here. I want to thank Dr. Williams, her talk. I want to tell you it's really a rare thing to have a African-American research science. I'm representing St. Joe's Hospital, a academic medical center, a major research facility. And one of the main challenges, particularly in healthcare, is recruiting black men into studies. Now, some of you may remember the Tuskegee study. There's fundamental inherent distrust in researchers. And to have Dr. Williams be a lead in this as many years as she had, it really sends a message and creates the bond. And I believe me, I've had many conversations with pharmaceuticals wanting to get inroads and to do we call zero-phase studies, where it's very bottom, very, very beginning of studies, and just all the barriers because the lack of trust, right? Right? So when you're talking about those numbers, that's an amazing accomplishment, and it's a tribute to your leadership, I'm sure. So this is historic for me because 44 years ago, I gave my first lecture in my own church, Christian Stronghold Baptist Church in Philadelphia, 44 years ago. It's really something. A lot has happened since that time, but I trained out east at Hospital University of Pennsylvania and Temple and did ER for many decades. I'm also an attorney. I went to law school about 18 years ago, practiced, and have been in hospital administration since. So there's a passion I have for both the legal issues as well as the medical, and I love the convergence. And I'm passionate about that. I'm first in my family ever to go into medicine, ever go to college for that matter. I grew up in the streets of New York, and there's a whole story behind that. Someday I might share it. So, Dr. Williams, thank you you've gotten some of the demographics in. I'm going to really take off from there, streamline my presentation, and take it from there. So definitely a different focus, but it's going to be very different, I can assure you. I presented this at the National Medical Association a couple years ago. That's our medical, NMA is the African American Association of Health Professionals and Scientists, as well as many other things. But go ahead, next slide. Next slide. And basically, Common Spirit, we've really committed into equity health. This isn't really good. It's not showing the wording on there, but it's just our commitment, Common Spirit. Common Spirit is the big organization. We're of 142 hospitals. Our hospital, St. Joe's downtown, is part of Common Spirit. We also call it Dignity Health. You may be familiar with that. And the commitment is to the community. It's the largest facility in our company of 142 hospitals, but we're also partnered with Baylor in Texas next. So I want to start with a story with a patient. It's always about the patient. And this patient is, his name is Jimmy. And Jimmy had diabetes and hypertension, was diagnosed with early kidney disease, and eventually went on to need dialysis. And as he went on with dialysis, it was about 10 years, he started having complications. And as an ER doctor, I see those complications. I see the complications from catheter insertions, infections, et cetera. So he was admitted, and again, he had no other veins to put in some of these catheters, and those are the kind of complications patients experience. And he eventually died from infection of those from the catheter, just to give you a highlight. Now, Jim is actually cousin Jim. He's my cousin. It's very personal to me, renal failure. Cousin Jim is my cousin from Springfield, Ohio. I think you know where Springfield is. I have 100 years of relatives from Springfield, Ohio. Well, this is my cousin. I'm sure in the social media world, you have somebody you personally know has chronic renal failure and dialysis, and you know the data, and it's already been presented. But go ahead. Next slide. Black Americans are 4 times more likely than white Americans to develop. We've already been through the data again. Next slide. And again, you've seen this data. Dr. Williams presented brilliantly. This is just a highlight of it. Next slide. But our kidney transplant service, we have a transplant service. We've seen a rapid rise. But what we haven't seen is a rapid rise of African Americans being recruited to the transplant center, to your point. And there's a lot of reasons. As a transplant service facility that we provide transplant, we get referrals. We assess the patients. If we don't get the referrals, we don't get the transplants. And those things are driven from the specialists, the nephrologists and other specialists. So there hasn't been an increase in African Americans being reassessed for kidney transplant. And that's a challenge, and that needs to happen for multiple reasons. Next slide. Next slide? Yeah, next slide. So I'm not going to go into depths of this. This is many kidney disease. You're going to hear kidney disease failure. There's spectrum. So you can have kidney disease without having failure. You can't have failure without kidney disease. There's many stages of kidney disease. And those stages end up eventually into failure where you're not producing any urine and unable to excrete the excess waste. There are many factors. Now, obviously, from damaged kidneys, you diagnose it with blood tests. Won't go into the details, but this is what's important, risk factors. We talked about those who are at risk. 1 in 3 of us are at risk for kidney disease if you have hypertension, diabetes. But there's other risk factors, age, race, obesity, and your family history. Next slide. If you take a microscope and you look at the actual good old diagram of what it looks like in the kidney, a high-powered microscope, you're going to see this diagram. That's what you'd see on high-power microscope. And essentially, I won't go into depth of what that is, but really the essence is glomerular filtration rate, eGFR. That's the rate of flow. If you don't get flow to the kidney, you can't excrete the waste. So there are a number of factors that we use to determine. We use a calculator. We call it a glomerular filtration rate estimation. It's based on factors like age and sex and creatinine. But there's one other factor that makes this a little bit interesting. That's race. There's a race factor that was put in here many years ago. And there were assumptions made about race. First, that, black people, they have bigger, higher body mass. Their diet's different. The way they clear their creatinine, their protein, is different. They made these assumptions in the calculation that created a different result. And I'll get into that next slide. So when we talk about eGFR, the rate, there's different ranges. Normal is anything 60 and above if you get those blood tests. And then there's the middle range. And we give stages of disease. So below 60, you have disease. That's where you have disease. And in below 15, that's when you're going to probably need dialysis of some form or other types of dialysis that we have. So that's the range. Now, the calculator that is race-based basically gave you as patients a false sense of security that you're all right, because the estimator actually gives you a number that's actually 10 points, 10%, 20% higher than what is actually. So when the doctor reads this and says, "Ooh, you're okay, you don't need anything done," that's not necessarily true, because it's a race-based calculator and it's giving you not truly accurate information. That's important, because if you go to the next slide, because the blood test that's race-based is used, what happens is as your kidneys start to fail little by little and you're not really getting accurate numbers, what's going to happen is the medications you're on can become toxic to the kidneys, that you're not using the proper dosage for the given level of kidney disease that you have. And that creates more problems, a cycle effect. It delays referral to a specialist and eventually significantly delays your opportunity to go for transplant service. That's what happens to a black patient with a race-based calculator. Next slide. So here's an example. We have eGFR non-African American, that's one number, 46. You have eGFR that's African American, 56. Remember the number. Anything above 60 is not. So 56 is not horrible. It's early, very early. So as an African American, the doctor says, "Hey, you're 56. You're okay. We'll follow you up in the next year." 46, that might be a different discussion, right? Different discussion. Well, this is my blood test. About 25 years ago, this is my blood test. I have chronic kidney disease. I'll let that sit for a minute. I, as a physician, have chronic kidney disease. So I'm not talking about a distant relative or friend. This is me, okay? And let me explain something to you. When I was 20 years old in my residency, I had hypertension. And I always used to, like many black men, make excuses. It's stress. Medical school, stress. I'm 20 years old. What am I doing? I ignored my hypertension. When I went to law school, stress. Med school, law school, it's all stress related when they did my screening. Ignored my blood pressure. That's what a lot of us do. And what was going on? The silent killer of hypertension was slowly eating my kidneys up. But it not be for the right physicians and the right people, I would not be here today. I got on the proper medication, proper monitoring, and I've been stable since. And it's because of early intervention. It matters. It really matters. Okay, next slide. There are a lot of other, there's a whole lot of other tests that are based on race. eGFR is just one. Next. It just gives you a sense of what's happening. So for Equity Heals, our company has been committed to educating, making sure the community knows that there's a race-based calculator, eliminating the race-based calculator, getting it off the reference labs that we are affiliated with. So you no longer have that race-based calculator in our reference labs all over the country, as well as many other hospitals that have done the same. So we've transitioned that calculation. Next slide. And so that's happened all over the place. University of Pittsburgh, California, LabCorp, which we're affiliated with, we've eliminated that race-based calculator. Because you can't, tell you something, there's a lot of providers have no idea what I'm talking about. They have no idea, and they, even to this day, don't realize there's a race-based calculator. Next. And use it as they see it. We started a community pilot. Our company president of the entire company of 142 hospitals asked Phoenix, and even though we have here about 7% African Americans in this community, I see proportionally a lot of African Americans in our hospital. Disproportionate number of folks are in our hospital with kidney disease, other medical problems. And I can tell you throughout the country, and I've been a lot of places, any dialysis center you go to, you're going to see a disproportionate number of African Americans in that dialysis unit. I can assure you that. You can be in the middle of nowhere, you're going to see a brother in that dialysis unit, one way or the other. All right, so we started that. Next slide. And been part of many community outreaches, part of the Urban League presenting. We actually had ministers come to our hospital and have discussions. And as I mentioned, I've been at the NMA. It's been a wonderful, we screened over 300 folks at a community outreach a couple years ago. So a lot of activity around that. Next slide. And just more increased awareness, more screening, the necessity. I can't tell you as a result of this how many people have come to me. It's been all over the media. How many professional physicians have it? I was surprised. They have a family history. I have this disease. Physicians have this disease. African American physicians don't talk about it because they don't have a pathway to talk about it, realizing they need to get help. Very important. And even former football players that I know grew up here in South Mountain. Former football players have gotten this message and really see the value because you mentioned earlier workers. And you imagine professional football players and what they do, and they're often looked at body mass because body mass is causing that creatinine up. No, it's not. It's a real early disease, and it has to be treated and taken care of seriously. Next slide. So I've already gone through this. Next slide. And it's really our commitment from Common Spirit to really address health equity, that we're going to use evidence-based medicine. We're going to collaborate in any way and make this happen. Next slide. I think it's the same one, but next slide. So this is my last one. I got a team, our company brought in a team of video experts, and the team here and others participated in a video. I'm going to show you this. This is going to give you a quick synopsis of what we're all about, and I can answer any questions. Go ahead with the video. Click race is not a factor. There it is. Unmute it. Historically, if you're a Black American, you are 4 times more likely to develop kidney failure than a white American. That was my cousin. He was one of those Black Americans who developed kidney disease. So am I. But I saw him and his life and how it took a downward spiral, the pain and the suffering he went through. Those things had a major impact on me. Had I not advocated for my own health, for additional testing, to see specialists, I most certainly wouldn't be here. My name is Victor Waters. I'm the Chief Medical Officer at St. Joseph Medical Center, part of Common Spirit Health. disease, chronic renal failure. We want to educate our community what the differences are. And the most important thing is chronic renal disease screening. There's a calculator that we've used, a test, a race-based test, and it gave Black patients a false sense of security that they were actually normal, but it was inaccurate. This calculator had made a difference in hurting the African American community. No longer do our laboratories provide the race-based calculator. We're now going to treat our populations the same, early and aggressively, if they have this disease. At Common Spirit, we have completely removed the race-based factors from our kidney diagnostics. Many people from various disciplines, teams, backgrounds across Common Spirit have worked tirelessly to see this change become a reality in every one of our hospitals. To witness such emphasis and play a role in raising awareness and education for communities of color throughout our healthcare system is a special thing. As a physician, it excites me about the future of healthcare. How's school?
Pretty good today.
Huh?
It was pretty good today.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
Recess?
Yeah, I played basketball.
Play basketball on this heat? You're kidding. You drank enough water, right?
Yeah, I got water like every 10 minutes. So.
I bet you. And as a father, it feels good to take these steps to protect our next generation. I'm so proud to be one of many working together to create change. And that my colleagues and I have implemented changes in our hospitals across 24 states to better serve our communities, to better serve people that look like me, that look like my cousin, and that look like my son. This is what medicine is all about. This is excellence. This is human kindness.
Awesome.
Any questions?
Dr. Weiss, that was awesome. Y'all give him another hand. That was great. You and Dr. Williams are dangerous people. You know that? Our community is better for it. I think that was just awesome for you to follow her and for the information that you presented to us.
Meant to happen.
Just two questions. How do we reduce the risk of kidney failure, which leads to dialysis, if I'm a patient? How can I reduce the risk of going on dialysis if I'm a patient?
Yeah, and that is, you know, Dr. Williams mentioned it, people are non-compliant to their medications, their diabetes, their hypertension. If they're not on the proper medications, getting followed early, that's how you can cut your risk of eventually going. Now, there's no such thing as, if you have severe kidney disease, reversing that. But once you go down a track, there are ways that you can prevent it by just we call mitigating the risk.
Okay. And how would I slow the progression if I'm a chronic kidney disease patient or have chronic kidney disease? How would I slow the progression of the kidney disease?
Yeah, and so there's some medications that are cardioprotective, that renal protective, meaning it protects the kidney and keeps the flow going. So there are certain medications that can actually do that. So it really counters the impact of the disease by making sure you're getting that waste out.
Excellent. And last question before we let you go. How can I live with chronic kidney disease and reduce the cardio deaths or heart attacks if I have chronic kidney disease? What do I need to do?
You say, how can
reduce the chances of me having a heart attack if I have chronic kidney disease?
So, and that's all part of the treatment of care of the whole body, the whole person. So their diabetes, their hypertension, their obesity, all those things matter. Being in sedentary life, all those risk factors are critically important to address early on. Again, I have all the predisposing factors. I have hypertension, cholesterol. I have a strong family. I have 9 aunts that have diabetes, all passed away from diabetes. So my daughter, I have an older daughter that is at risk. She's cholesterol since she was 20, just like me. We are predisposed, but if we keep going a certain direction in terms of obesity and allowing our blood pressure to be ignored, that ends up where we end up in trouble.
Excellent, thank you. Let's give him another hand. I appreciate
you.
it so much. You have a question? I'm sorry, Raymond. Okay, well, I was bringing you up next. Well, hold on, here you go. Hold on one second. We're live. Hold on.
Raymond Scott.
Yes, Raymond.
I guess I was just wondering, are there still medical facilities, hospitals, doctors that are still using EGFR as a measurement?
Great question. I don't know. There is a commitment on our part based on studies that we need to move in this direction some years ago. And I can tell you, even within our own organization, which is large, we have 1,800 physicians, surgeons. We have, our company has over 6,000 providers on, we call the physician enterprise. I can tell you on my grand rounds how many are not aware of this race-based calculator or how it even came about. And so I can only say that the lack of knowledge, even within our own organization of providers, was shocking. So I can only imagine, I can interpolate that other organizations that don't have the same level of commitment to health equity is still performing. I can only assume it.
Yeah, and there are other organizations that still use race-based EGFR calculations. I mean, I think when the NKF came out with the guidelines in 2021 to move from that, it certainly made a difference, and we have to continue to educate folks to know that that is the right way to go. But yeah, it's still there.
Yeah.
Dr. Watts, thank you so much.
Thank
Let's
you.
give him another hand. Thank you so very much. We have some surveys in the front. If you would take the time to make sure that you do the pre-survey and get those to us before you leave. We're going to make sure those work. I know that Dr. Waters and some others had to leave, but make sure we do those. We're going to have 2 patient advocates to come now to the stage. One, Mr. Raymond Scott, who was born and raised in Charleston, South Carolina. As an adult, he served in the United States Army, which brought him to Arizona. His roots are in southern, he says southern, and here in Arizona now. He'll be joined by Ms. Angela Beatty, who is a woman of faith and a warrior for kidney disease. She's married with 3 children and 5 grandchildren, hardworking and passionate, and she's dedicated. So both of them will share their story and their journey with us as patient advocates and patients that have chronic kidney disease. Would you please give them a hand as they come this afternoon?
Good afternoon. I was diagnosed with kidney failure back in October of 2021. It was a shock. A couple of years prior to that, I had been referred to a urologist because of protein in my urine. And the urologist did some testing and everything was good there. And then I was referred to a nephrologist, and I saw him a couple of appointments. One of the first things he did was prescribe me high blood pressure medication to manage my high blood pressure. And he ordered an ultrasound of my kidneys. The ultrasound came back with no issues. And so I thought everything was fine. Shortly thereafter, COVID hit, and then I didn't continue on with my follow-up appointments with my nephrologist because of COVID. I was concerned about not getting COVID, so I just stopped going to all of my doctors, really. And then I felt fine. I wasn't consistent with taking my high blood pressure medicine. And over a period of about a year and a half, what I didn't know was that high blood pressure was damaging my kidneys. And every now and then I'd have times where I might feel tired and I just felt like, oh, I did too much today. I would check my blood pressure and see that it was high, but I felt that the blood pressure meds aren't working, so it's not a big deal and I feel okay. But I didn't inform anybody. I didn't tell my doctor about that so they could maybe change my prescription or do something to try to manage it better. I just thought I was fine since I felt fine. Until I didn't. Later in 2021, when I started to feel ill, I had a loss of appetite. I began to lose weight, and I had a metallic taste in my mouth. And that's when I made a decision, okay, it's time to go back to the doctor. So I went to my PCP, they ordered blood work, and when the blood work came back, they contacted me and said, you need to go to the ER right now. And they said, you were in kidney failure. And I said, what? What do you mean? And they said, yeah, you need to go right now. You need to get in touch with your nephrologist ASAP. So I did that. I went to the hospital and was admitted. I started emergency dialysis right away. I was in the hospital for 2 weeks on emergency dialysis, and it was so hard and difficult with my body adjusting to dialysis, being sick and nauseous. It just was rough, and I felt ready to just give up on life. But I thank God for my support team. I had a great support team and my family, my close friends, my church family, all of the staff at the hospital helped me to keep fighting to live another day. And dialysis is hard. It takes a lot of energy from you. And it's been a difficult journey, but I know and I believe that God spared my life for a purpose such as this, to be able to spread kidney disease awareness and help somebody else with my story. And so I know that every experience, good or bad, that God can use it for good, for my good. And I'm grateful for this opportunity to be able to share, because as I go sharing my testimony and my story, I come across so many people that don't know the link between high blood pressure and diabetes and kidney disease, which is something that I didn't know before I was affected with this. And there's too many people out there that just don't know. And I was one of them. And I hope that I can make a difference and get the word out so that people can be aware of kidney disease and the risk factors. And so that is my purpose in life now, and my goal, and what I'm passionate about is helping other people. Thank you.
Excellent. Raymond?
All right. My name is Raymond Scott, and I'm going to stand because after 8 years in the military, I learned you have to stand, be recognized, and be heard. So no offense to you, of course. But I am a 26-year dialysis warrior, not patient, not victim, but warrior, because it has been a war. And believe me, my family and I have shared into it. And I just have to say that I've done all the modalities, peritoneal dialysis, in-center dialysis. Now in the past 12 years, I've been doing home hemodialysis. I also had a transplant by my brother, which I'm telling you was 5 years of freedom. And I celebrated each and every year of that. So My job here today is just to enlighten you, and it's something that I take seriously in informing dialysis patients about, because I am not the norm. I am quite different. You're looking at, and I'm going to toot my own horn, the first patient to do Dancing with the Stars with the National Kidney Foundation of Arizona. That is patient on dialysis. They had peritoneal and transplant patients do it. But I am currently on dialysis. I've got a lot to say, but I'm just going to round it all up by saying that, or using them or my family as a motivation. I remember dancing with my daughter and her standing on my feet. This is the dance we're going to do when I get married, Daddy, yeah. So, but in that, I was making a promise to her that I was going to be here for her, that I was going to do everything I can and will do to be here for her, to walk her down the aisles, similar to this, walk her down the aisles, not in a wheelchair, not with a crutches, not with a cane, but her dad standing proud and presenting her to the world. This is my motivation. My wife, and I have to tell you, 26 years ago, she was then my girlfriend, and this is how it began. Say, you need to go get that cough taken. Have somebody look at that cough because it sounds really bad. And me being the man that I am, of course I listened to her. 3 days later, went to the urgent care. The nurse took my blood pressure 3 times. Came back, ran to the back, came back with the doctor, and the doctor said, Mr. Scott, do you have any tightness in your chest or a headache or anything? I said, no, I just have this cough. I came to get some antibiotics so I can go to work. He said, you're not going to work. You're going to the hospital. I just called an ambulance. Your blood pressure is 280 over 180, and we have to get you to the emergency room. I said, well, okay. So the ambulance gets there, and they wheel me outside, and I'm looking to my left, and I'm like, Phoenix Fire Rescue? You got a fire truck and an ambulance here? I didn't understand what's the big deal. It's just a blood pressure. Went to the hospital. They did my blood pressure, 300 over 200 by the time I got to the hospital. Doctor did urinalysis and blood work, came back, Mr. Scott, your kidneys have failed, and I've scheduled you for surgery so you can get dialysis tonight. Now, he started explaining the different modalities, but I didn't hear a word he said. All I saw was his lips moving. But all I could think about was, how much time do I have left? How much time do I have left? That's all I thought about. I didn't know what the numbers were, and I didn't care, and I don't think I even wanted to know. I just wanted to know what now, what's next. So as the years went by, and I went through the different modalities, and I found one that truly worked for me. And right now, I'm actually on the transplant list with the Houston VA, and we are going to be blessed. I know this for sure. But it hasn't all been gumdrops and rainbows. There were times when, and I'm going to say this in this blessed place, that I questioned God. Why must this be my cross to bear? Why me? There are so many people out there who are doing bad and dirty. Why me? And the answer I got back was, I'm going to give you a wife that's going to be a bulldog, and she's my bulldog for your treatment. I'm giving you a family that's going to love, support, and lift you up in time of need. I'm going to give you a church family that's going to stay with you and pray with you. So that's the things that's gotten me through. Dialysis is hard, and it's a balancing act. And what this company is doing, I mean, because I can tell you, my kids even know I have to take my binders. I have to take them. So they even remind me, hey, Dad, did you take your binders? Man, leave me alone. Yeah, I took my binders. I'm good. So as a family, we come together to strengthen not only me, but other dialysis patients, other patients who are longing for that example of what life can be instead of what life is like right now for me on dialysis. What can I do? I mean, if given a choice to go back, I would do everything the same way that it has been done, because this is the path that God has chosen for me, and I accept it wholeheartedly. Thank you very much.
Great testimony. Give him a hand. Thank you so much. You and Angela did an awesome job. Angela, you and I were talking about kidney transplants and getting on the transplant list. Talk a little bit, if you would, and I'll defer to Raymond after you, about the dangers, about the measures that we have to go through to get on a transplant list, so others can share that as we look at our viewing audience.
Go ahead.
It's a long, extensive process, and it can be very frustrating. It took me 8 months to get on the transplant list. I've been on the transplant list since 2022, and they told me that with my blood type, it could be 3 to 5 years to receive a deceased donor kidney. But you know, it was just a long process with all the different tests and evaluations, clearances that you have to get, you know, dental clearance, colonoscopy for women, the pap smear. It just seemed like ends and ends of testing that you had to go through. And then I work, so then to have to take off time to be able to schedule some of these other routine tests like CT scans of the heart and ultrasounds of this and that. You know, they want to make sure that everything in your body is that they give you the green light before they check off to say that you are ready for a transplant. You have to meet with a financial counselor, a social worker, to do a psych eval. There's so much that is involved with it, but you know, that's part of what you have to do.
That's quite a journey. Raymond, you sound like you're a veteran. You said, what branch again?
Army.
Army. Okay.
United States Army.
United States Army, United States Navy talking to you. No problem. So what we're going to do now is talk a little bit about the veterans portion of this. How they help you, and maybe even your outside insurance besides TRICARE maybe, help you to get through this. I know that Angela talked about the CAT scans, the psych review we had to do, the dental, the other CAT scans. Talk a little bit about how the veterans help you with the VA.
Yeah, from a veteran's point of view, I just have to say that it has been a blessing for me and my family, because just yesterday I got the totals of my dialysis treatment for 1 month was $254,000 for 1 month for all my treatments, medications, and so on and so forth. There are many hurdles that even patients that I've met, because I am a patient advocate, patients that I have met, and one who came to me and said, I don't know what I'm going to do. I got enough money for 2 more treatments, and I'm done. So they're being forced into a position where they have to decide, am I going to feed my family, or I'm going to get this treatment? Being the man that I am, and I've learned sacrifice from my mother, you do all that you can and will do for your family. But the VA has been very accommodating to not only myself, but my family and the support they've given. I mean, when I do go for my transplant, and I know it's going to be soon, and I know God has that right kidney just for me, right. I know he does. That when we go to Houston VA for the treatment, that my wife will be secure and taken care of. Okay. I know that for sure, and that's through the VA. But it has been a blessing to me. There's a lot of testing that goes on with transplant, and that's to be expected. Just like she said, you know, I mean, it may seem arduous at first, but these are the steps that we have to take in order to get this transplant done safely in the correct way.
Last, before we let you go, Ardelyx and HEAL are trying to get this information out to the community so that we can get churches involved and make sure that our fraternities, sororities, wherever we can get this information in the community. Since Ardelyx and HEAL is here today, what can we do additionally to help get the information out to our community with patient advocates like yourselves? What you see anything that we can do better to get it out? I don't understand, Angela, you and I talked about the work you're doing in the church and in the community, and Raymond, you just told us what you're doing. What can we do at Ardelyx and what can we do with HEAL to get this information out even better, and how can you guys assist us as patient advocates?
I can assist by getting the information out to my church. I attend First New Life here in Phoenix, and I can talk with leadership there to see if I can, you know, get the information out and be able to give it out to members, and maybe see about sharing something online as well.
Okay. Raymond?
Yeah, for me, my family has a nonprofit called 1 in 9. 1in9kidneychallenge.com is our website. We also have 1 in 9 Kidney Challenge on Facebook, and we have a lot of contacts with that too. So we can actually work with you guys in order to, you know, give you more exposure from our people that we have. I'm willing to go anywhere, do anything that I can to support you guys in that way if we find it feasible for one another, and I think it is. My wife, my beautiful and awesome wife, Annalyn Scott, of course, will talk to you before you leave, I'm sure.
Okay.
But we will support you guys in any way that we see that's feasible for both parts and both parties.
Okay. Lastly, we just had an election. How can we help here with HEAL and to have Ardelyx to make sure that we're doing the right thing with our legislators? Saturday we have another part 2 that's going to talk about policy and those kinds of things that we need to do. Dr. Williams talked about the food deserts and the things that we needed for nutrition as it relates to our patients that have chronic kidney disease. In your community, how are you working, or how can we work with your legislators, your state representatives, your state senators, to make sure that policy is implemented and that would be impactful for us and encourage them to do things with our chronic kidney disease, even help with the resolution that we have in Congress, but especially with our state legislature here in Arizona?
The national,
working with our legislators.
Yeah, the National Kidney Foundation, they have a group that are advocates, and they have a page similar to what was presented earlier, where I'm on the email list, so I'll get an email about different bills that are coming up, that if they want us to get involved, to reach out to our legislators, there's a form that we can fill out. I've done that a few times. And then my senator or my representative has responded by email to let me know that they've received it and that they are in agreement or working on it. So I feel like that's a good tool to use.
Excellent. Right.
And for us, 1 in 9, that is, I was actually on Dialysis Patient Citizens, or I was on their board. Dialysis Patient Citizens actually went before Congress and spoke to legislators. My wife and I has spoken at Kirsten Sinema's office. We've actually met Ruben Gallego and told him our intentions and what our work is like and what we're doing for the community. But a willingness to work with others. It doesn't matter what political affiliation you are, but if you can help dialysis patients, that's what we're looking at. So we're used to it. We've done it before. We can do it again.
Excellent. Let's give them another hand. Thank you so very much for your story and your testimony. Okay, got a question. Hold on. We online.
Sorry. Mr. Raymond, Mr. U.S. Army,
All right.
No, your high blood pressure, was it triggered by the reduction of your kidney function, or was it something else?
So, actually, back in 1992, I was stationed at Fort Irwin, California. I was in a really bad car accident with a friend of mine who actually passed away. I got beat up really badly, and what they think is my kidneys shut down. And when they came back online, all of a sudden I had high blood pressure since then. But the remnants of that and the high blood pressure over a long period of time actually caused my kidneys to fail. So that's how I just found out. I mean, a simple thing I could have done, and I was taking medication for high blood pressure that I had gotten in the military, but I didn't have a blood pressure cuff. I couldn't check myself. Just the little things that you can do that'll help you. So just a simple buy, $18 for a blood pressure cuff.
Excellent. Thank you so very much. Let's give them another hand as they come down.
All right.
We appreciate you so very, very much for your testimony here today. It kind of concludes our first part one, with our delegates and with Hill Collaborative. And we want to thank Pilgrim Rest Baptist Church again. Don't forget, we have a second part on Saturday, and we want to continue to talk about this Resolution 5074 from Mr. Buddy Carter from the state of Georgia. And we're also happy that our congressperson, Hank Johnson, has signed on to the bill as well. And we make sure that he continues to get other people involved in that. Don't forget to do the surveys for us as well, and then we're going to prepare ourselves for Saturday when we will have some of the legislators here, and I think Howard Mosby will serve as a legislator again. He's coming out of retirement to make sure that we talk about policy and make sure that our public health system is still in place and that we will be able to present even a better program. And our delegates, thank you so very much for being with us again today, and our partner. I'll give them a hand as well for coming with us today to Arizona. Ms. Sibley, you want to send us home, and don't forget to do the questionnaires and surveys that we had. And how would I miss anything? Okay. Ms. Sibley, we'll see you in part 2 Saturday for those online viewers. Part 2 on Saturday for part 2. Come on in.
Amen, amen. Wasn't that wonderful information, necessary information, important information? And I'm not really for sure how we can get a hold of the pre-survey today online. It may be online, but definitely Saturday here, it will be here. Yes, the link is in the chat. So I'm going to just end us in a word of prayer, because that's what I do, is pray. And I'm going to be praying for those legislatures and everybody who is involved. Father God, we just want to thank you for such a great time and information. God, we perish for lack of knowledge, and we thank you for the knowledge, the wisdom that is going to go forth. And we thank you, God, that all the policies and the bills and the things that are needed that will take this to the next level, so that things that are needed, the resources that are needed, the medications that are needed will be available and prevalent to whoever needs them. God, we ask that you would just continue to do what you do, using us to be your hands, your feet, and your mouthpiece. It is in Jesus' name that we pray, and we all said amen.
Great job.